Welcome to the monthly Preferred CFO web class. My name is Bob McDonald with Preferred CFO. Tara Chrisman will be our administrator for today's meeting. Today's topic is managing human capital, key considerations with recruiting, retention, and HR compliance. It will be presented by our Preferred CFO team member, Tom Applegarth. It's intended to be 45 to 60 minutes. Tom has indicated that he'd like to answer field questions timed to the topic. Please use the Q&A feature first. Tara and I will monitor and then consolidate the questions. We'd like to do it on a timely manner rather than waiting until the very end so that we can address the question that is specific to a topic. If you have a specific question that you don't want to bring up in the group, you can put that into chat as far as just for the desire for us to contact you after the webinar. Just a reminder, there's no cost for these web classes. They're offered free from Preferred CFO. We have an upcoming webinar on Monday, the 25th of November, the secret sauce, improving profitability, how to improve the profitability of your business by drilling down on products and customers. If you are a CFO, we highly encourage you to bring the CEO of the company as well. It's probably our most important webinar that we do. We don't call secret sauce for nothing. With that, I give you Tom Applegarth.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. So just as a brief introduction, my name's Tom Applegarth. I've been in HR my entire career for more than 30 years. I was head of HR of a company with about 250 million in revenue, 700 employees in 5 countries. I was a head of HR of $1 billion division for a Goodyear Tire and Rubber company. I was the head of recruiting for a company for Flowserve that was about 2 billion in revenue in 10 plus countries. Head of comp and benefits for a company called Belden. It was about 2.5 billion in revenue, and also the head of union and labor relations for Flowserve. And so I currently work for Preferred CFO, and we provide outsourced finance, accounting, HR, and payroll for small companies, and I run the HR practice. So 3 topics we're going to cover today: recruiting, retention, and HR compliance. So, there's always going to be blips in whether unemployment's high or unemployment's low, but long term in the United States, I think we are going to have a war for talent, and talent is just going to become harder and harder to recruit. The baby boomers are retiring. It's currently 19% of the workforce. The U.S. Birth rates are dropping and don't show any sign of increasing. And so in the last 4 or 5 years, the only growth in U.S. labor force is immigration. And with our political issues around immigration, I'm not sure that's going to, be something that we're going to continue to have enough immigrants to really help the workforce keep pace with a growing economy. One bullet point on that is last year, 780,000 people applied for the 85,000 H-1B visas that are available. And the H-1B visas are the most prevalent way for immigrants to come into the U.S. So you can see that demand far outstrips supply, at least in the current political environment. So recruiting is going to continue to be an issue for most companies. Last year, in a survey, 91% of the companies said they had difficulty recruiting, and there are currently more than 8.1 million job openings that are advertised, and we only have 6.8 million unemployed people. So recruiting is going to get harder rather than easier. So there's several different strategies that companies usually employ when they go to recruit. The cheapest by far is advertising. So advertising those positions is something that most companies do. But going out and recruiting on college campus is another strategy that not all companies do, but I think is a very effective and very cost efficient way to go out and recruit if you need somebody with a college degree. And internships is a great way to have somebody work for you for the summer, and then you really know after they've worked for you for the summer whether or not you want to hire them. Employee referral programs is another great way to recruit. Social media, getting on LinkedIn or the other social media ways is another great way to touch people and find candidates. And then recruiting firms. So let's go into each one of those in a little bit of detail. So advertising for positions. I mean, I'm a firm believer that most positions you ought to advertise for it. And Indeed and LinkedIn are the two that I think are the sites that I've had the most success with. But there's lots of others. There's lots of others, and sometimes if you're looking for some very specific skill sets, there's probably some websites that are much better than others. But for most business positions, Indeed and LinkedIn are probably the best to go to, and relatively cheap. And if you can fill a job by advertising it, you ought to, because it's definitely the cheapest and most effective way to do that. Um, you can't always fill positions through posting it online, and that's when you may really use some of the other strategies that are a little more difficult and certainly more expensive. College recruiting and internships, however, is one that isn't very expensive at all. Your real cost is the travel to college campuses. Although you can even do it over Zoom at most college campuses today as well, so you can even eliminate that expense if you want to. However, it's depending on the environment. In years when unemployment is low and a lot of companies are going to campus, not going to campus, you may not always get in front of the best and the brightest. But going to campus and going to career fairs and finding candidates is a cheap and pretty effective way to find new talent coming out of college. Of course, there's a downside to college recruiting. They are book smart, but don't always have much experience. So depending on the role that you're looking for, may or may not be a good candidate for that role. So there can be a lot of training and development costs. There's generally higher turnover amongst new college grads than there are other folks. And it's probably just human nature. People coming out of college are still don't really know what they want to be when they grow up a lot of times. And so they may come into your job and, decide after 6 months or a year or whatever, that's not exactly what they want to do for the rest of their lives. And they may leave. So there's higher turnover amongst college graduates, and there are people that you recruit, that have a little more experience under their belt. But it's a great way to be able to bring in, if you're an organization and you want to bring in some folks and train and develop them and be able to promote them into increasing levels of responsibility. It's a great pipeline and certainly something that I encourage companies to do. Employee referral programs. They're more than most companies use employee referral programs. It's a great way to find talent that your employees recommend. Your employees usually aren't going to recommend people unless they really think they're going to be a good fit for your company and for the position that they're recommending them for. So candidates are more likely to accept an offer. It's a very inexpensive way to find candidates. You don't need to give a lot of money to employees to get them to refer. You can give them a gift certificate. Sometimes you may want to give them more, but it's more about just communicating, helping people understand how to refer a candidate, and then giving them a gift certificate or something else to do that. Some companies offer more. Deloitte who has almost a 500,000 employees, are getting 49% of their candidates through employee referral, and they offer $1,000 payable on the third month anniversary of a new employee. And that's not uncommon. There's a lot of companies doing that. But employee referral programs, I think, are a great way to recruit candidates. Social media. So 200 of the 270 million adults in the US are on LinkedIn. And most of them have a lot of detail about their background on LinkedIn. And so if you have posted the job and you haven't been able to fill it, and you're just really looking at how can I fill this job because I'm looking for a particular background and particular experience, LinkedIn is a great way to do that. It's time consuming, so that's the downside, because you can go out and for not a lot of money, you can buy a license to be able to search on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is very protective in that they don't want people to get a lot of outreach through LinkedIn. They really want to limit the spam. So they really limit your ability to, you can't go online, do a search, say, oh great, there's 100 people that look like they have the skill set that I want, and you can't easily reach out to all 100 of them on LinkedIn all the time. And it depends on your licensing. You can pay a lot of money and reach out to all 100 of them. But if you're a small company and you're doing somewhat limited recruiting, LinkedIn's a great place to find them. And then with the time, you can reach out to them on LinkedIn, sending direct messages and whatnot. But you'll find after you do, 30 or 40 or sometimes 50, LinkedIn will start to restrict your ability to reach out to people directly through LinkedIn. And so then, the method is, contacting them, calling them. I mean, most of the time you can find the phone number of a company that somebody works for. You can call into that company and ask for that person by name, and you can get there. But it's definitely time consuming, and so it's a great tool if you have. It's a great tool for recruiters, and it's a great tool if you have someone that has time on their hand and can reach out to candidates and sell them on the position. Um, and Facebook and Instagram to some extent are another way to do that. But you're reaching out to passive candidates, many of whom are going to tell you, most of whom, vast majority of whom are going to tell you, no, I'm pretty happy where I'm at and not really interested in looking. But if you're looking for a very specific skill set, that's one way to do it, and maybe the cheapest way to do it. The other way to do it is recruiting firms. And most recruiting firms are using LinkedIn and then calling people and pitching them their jobs. And so if you don't have, the time or resources, or, maybe somebody who can actually sell candidates on the job, then outsourcing it to a recruiting firm is definitely an option. And that's also one of the lines of business that we do here at Preferred CFO is when companies need help recruiting, we do that. And the way we're doing it is primarily through LinkedIn and reaching out to passive candidates and talking to 90 of them to get one or two that might be interested in the job. So that's recruiting. Employee retention. So once you recruit employees, you need to retain them, because especially with the war on talent, it is more and more difficult to recruit employees. And so the more employees that you can retain, the less recruiting you have to do, and the more you're going to win that war on talent. And there's a big cost to retention, not only in having a difficult time in a difficult time kind of retaining or winning the war on talent. The cost of hiring somebody is pretty large. I've had a lot of companies I've worked with where we've gone and really quantified the cost of recruit or of turnover, and it's really eye-opening on how much it does cost you. The administrative costs of turnover are the easiest to quantify. So the cost that you may have with a employee, or I mean the cost with either advertising the job, and if you're able to easily fill the job in advertising it, well then that's a pretty low cost. If you have to go hire a recruiter, that's probably a much more significant cost. But those costs are easy to quantify. Where the cost that a lot of companies don't quantify is the lost productivity and quality issues due to the learning curve. So I worked with a manufacturing company not very long ago, and it was an exercise that we went through to really identify what is the cost of turnover. And they were hiring people, at 15, $20 an hour. They were coming in and working in a manufacturing plant. And so, it wasn't necessarily intuitive how big the cost of turnover was. But when you go and look and say, well, how long does it take us to train somebody to do that manufacturing job? And in this specific case, the answer was, well, it's really about 4 months before they're as productive as somebody who's been around for a year or two or longer. And so then you kind of look at, all right, well, what am I paying that person for 4 months? And and what productivity am I getting out of them for that 4 months? And it was not an insignificant cost. It was basically, in the first 4 months, you're maybe getting 50% productivity out of them over that 4 months. Initially it's much lower, and towards the end of the 4 months, it's closer to 100%. But over that 4 month period, you're in this specific case, you're 50% productivity. And then the quality issues they were having with new hires have even increased the cost above that. And so that's a cost that I think it's good for companies to really understand what is the cost of turnover and productivity and quality. There's other costs that aren't very easy to quantify. With a high rate of turnover, supervisors and employees are not really focusing on continuous improvement as much. So there's a cost there. That can be pretty hard to quantify, but there's definitely a cost. The constant turnover sometimes have a snowball effect. It demoralizes the workforce, and turnover can create more turnover. And absenteeism and turnover are often directly related. Most companies that have high turnover also have high absentee rates. There's lower turnover often decreases your workers' compensation and helps on time and delivery and other metrics. And so I think it's good for companies to really try and quantify as best as possible the cost of turnover for specific positions that they have, and especially positions where they may be having a lot of turnover issues. And you're really looking at, well, what is the cost of that turnover? And sometimes increasing the compensation to decrease the turnover will actually save you money. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, but you can give sometimes a 10 or 15% increase in what your starting wage is, and you'll actually decrease your turnover and save money as a company. So what are some strategies for employee retention?
Sorry to break into you, Tom. We have a couple questions I'd like to bring up.
Okay.
When it comes to advertising for a new job or posting a new job and retention, have we moved from the one size fits all to having a specifically targeted method for the different generations that we have now, as far as you've got the baby boomers, the Xers, the millennials, and whatnot. I don't go on TikTok and Instagram, but my girls do. So
Sure.
can you speak to that topic?
Absolutely. Yes. So there are definitely, depending on which generation you're trying to target, there's definitely different ways to target that population. And so if you're hiring a lot of people that are in their 20s, there's a different strategy, and depending on whether you're requiring a college degree or whether it's that's not that important in the job and it's more of an entry level job, but absolutely different. There's people in their 20s aren't on Facebook as much, if at all. They're definitely on Instagram and TikTok. So, targeting where you're recruiting, and what the generation is that you're recruiting for certainly plays a role. And more, we're finding that a lot of people are finding jobs on social media and not necessarily going to the job boards. So the job boards are becoming less and less effective, over time. So back to employee retention. Um, Definitely compensation and benefits is always the number one issue. You need to be competitive. You don't have to have the best compensation, and you certainly don't need the best benefits in America to have low attrition. But you do need to be competitive. You need to have competitive benefits. Most of the time, employees or candidates are going to look at your benefits, and do you have medical? Do you have a 401k? What's the matching on your 401k? Do you have dental? Do you have vision? And as long as you have that, somewhat competitive, people generally aren't looking for great benefits. They're just looking for competitive benefits. Compensation, most people are going to, try and make as much money as they can. But if your employee is happy and they are compensated, at the market level for their skill set, you're going to usually be able to hold on to them because they're not necessarily going to be even looking for a job. But if they, and a lot of employees do every once in a while, they hear they're talking to their friends or they see it on social media or go to Glassdoor or whatever. If they get a sense that, wow, I could make a lot more money going somewhere else, they're going to start looking. And so that's where I think it's really critical for people to understand, for companies to understand and look at salary survey information and understand how they're paying compared to the other options that their employees have. So that's a big driver. But as long as you're monitoring that and making sure that you're paying competitively and you have competitive benefits, you can really mitigate that as an issue. Managers make all the difference. If people love their manager, they're not going to go out looking at other potential employers and maybe find out that they can make a lot more money going somewhere else. If they're happy with their manager and they're happy with their job, and the manager usually is a big driver on whether or not they're happy with their job, people aren't going to go look. If they're not happy with their manager, that most of the time they're then not happy with their job and they're going to leave. And so I think that having employee engagement surveys and other mechanisms to understand what employees are happy and which employees are not happy, and then really being able to address that proactively and training, developing, and maybe getting rid of managers that aren't good at retaining their employees is something that I think all companies really ought to take a look at. Definitely the younger generations really put a lot of value on development opportunities. And so if you hire somebody that's in their 20s or even 30s and you're not asking them what kinds of additional opportunities and experiences do you look for, here's how we're going to develop you, and give them increasing responsibility and the ability to grow their skill set and grow into bigger jobs, you're going to have a hard time retaining them. A lot of people really, especially in their 20s and 30s today, are looking for those professional development opportunities. Work-life balance. It's not, the baby boomers are probably the generation that has the least amount of value on work-life balance. The younger generations, that's definitely a big key of theirs. Flexibility, being able to work remotely is huge. And a lot of companies are having some attrition as they try and swing that pendulum back, where maybe they had a lot of remote employees during the pandemic, and now they're forcing people back into the office. That can be a key driver of turnover. And so understanding that balance and talking to your employees and understanding, whether or not that's important to them, so that if you do make some of those changes and are forcing people back into the office, that you at least go in with your eyes wide open and understand what that might do to your employee retention. And then reward and recognition. I think that it's relatively inexpensive. It just takes establishing a process and having somebody manage that process, but rewarding and recognizing your employees. And it doesn't have to be with money all the time. Helping your managers understand and having a process that encourages them to just talk to their employees when they're doing a great job and telling them they're doing a great job, which sometimes doesn't always come intuitively to all managers, is an important tool that companies can use to retain employees. So we talked about recruiting, we've talked about retention. Now let's talk a little bit about HR compliance. So one of the things, my favorite joke is that one of the worst inventions ever is air conditioning, and the reason is prior to air conditioning, Congress only met pretty much 3 or 4 months a year because Washington D.C. is too hot to really be indoors or be part of the climate during the summer. So Congress wasn't in session. Now with air conditioning, they're there 10, 11 months a year, and they're passing a lot of laws. And so there are a lot of laws passed by on the federal level, and then depending on what state you're in, California is definitely California and New York are probably two of the worst, but state governments every year are passing a lot of laws that are dealing with how companies have to deal with their employees. So hiring practices, terminations, definitely most lawsuits that companies end up facing is when they terminate an employee. So making sure that you do that right. And I'm a big believer in making sure that that there's some documentation around employees not performing well, and then when you terminate somebody, giving them a little bit of severance. It doesn't have to be much, a week or two of severance, but having them sign a waiver not to sue you in exchange in order to receive that severance is one of the cheapest forms of insurance that you can have when terminating an employee. But there's a lot of companies that have ended up having to pay a lot of money when they terminate people. And so making sure that you do that in the right way is important. But it's also important to if somebody's not able to be a productive employee and you've worked with them and tried to help them make a productive employee, you can't have a successful business and have a lot of people who are poor performers either. So, you need to do it, but you need to do it in the right way. There's a lot of laws around leaves of absences, and when people, are have health issues or family issues or have a baby or even paternity leave in some states. So there's a lot of leave of absence issues that you just need to make sure you're up to speed on all of the different laws for where you have employees. And companies that are virtual and have companies or have employees working virtually, well, you're held accountable for the laws in the state where the employee is performing the work. And so, you may not think that you have California employees, but if you have remote employees and one of them moves to California, well, you now are being held accountable for the California laws for that employee that is working remotely and moved to California. So it's important to understand where your employees live and make sure that you have a process on how you're going to make sure you're being legally compliant. So, I think it's these are kind of worst case scenarios for sure, but this happens a lot across the United States. And so I always like to help business owners understand, the potential downsides of not understanding all of what you're doing from a employment law legal perspective. And my favorite personal example, I have two, and they're really termination related. In my career, I've probably either personally terminated or someone who works for me, an HR manager working for me, has terminated well over 1,000 employees. And there's really most of those we've offered them a waiver. If we've offered them severance, and if they signed a waiver, we'll pay them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever we thought was appropriate in the different situation. And 95% of the employees signed a waiver. There was one employee who was a plant manager of a company that I worked for that the division president didn't want to offer any severance, and I tried to encourage him to offer severance. He didn't want to, so we didn't. We terminated the plant manager, and the plant manager definitely needed to be terminated, but also most likely would have signed a waiver. And this plant manager was in California, and found an attorney who wanted like $3 or $4 million. So we ended up not settling it, and we actually lost though $1 million. And so that happened 20 years ago. But that's where I developed my philosophy that I'm always going to try and have people sign a waiver. And the CEO of that company came to see me and was like, "Hey, Tom, what happened?" And I was like, "I should have come to you and let you make that decision when the division president didn't want to offer severance." And I'll never make that mistake again. So that's one example. Another example, we actually had we fired a store manager, and she sued us and wanted a lot of money, and we didn't settle, and we went and we actually won, which was great. We won, and the attorneys presented us the bill, and cost us $100,000 to win. And so that again is where I always think 2, 3, 4 weeks of severance is cheap, compared to if somebody finds a lawyer and sues you after you sue them or after you terminate them. But Red Robin, on a wholly different type of situation, 4 women complained to a manager about a line cook who made offensive sexual comments. The manager didn't do enough to stop the conduct, in their opinion. They went and found a lawyer and ended up costing Red Robin $600,000. So again, taking all complaints seriously. And I think it's good to have an HR professional or a manager that has a lot of background to make sure that employees understand what they can and can't do, and that you don't end up in this type of a situation. A company called Pearl B-Star reached a $2 million settlement with a company for underpaying 32 workers. They were violating some state labor laws around record keeping and payroll timekeeping. And so it's really critical that your payroll systems are very effective, because there's a lot of companies that end up not paying people for all the hours they're working, maybe treating people as exempt when they're really not exempt. And those can add up really quickly, not because the dollar amounts for any individual employee adds up a lot, but these are the kind of cases that lawyers love, where they can do a class action lawsuit, get 30, 40, 50 employees who all have the same issue, and those can become really, really expensive really, really quickly. And then Jana King, a commercial cleaning company, settled a lawsuit for $3 million for misclassifying its employees as 1099 independent contractors. And I see a lot of businesses that I work with that are absolutely misqualifying or misclassifying employees as 1099. I think that might be the most common mistake I see, and I quickly encourage them that no, let's move them and just put them as W-2 employees, because if they are working solely for your company, um, it's definitely much safer and not that much cost involved to just have them be a W-2 employee rather than a 1099 employee. So, and it's pretty technical and somewhat subjective as you're going through that. But I just encourage most people, unless there's a really good reason why you absolutely can't have them as a W-2 employee, it's much safer to do that. So that was a relatively quick through those three topics, but certainly happy to answer any questions that anybody has around that topic or any of the topics that we've talked about. And if not, then it was nice talking to you, and feel free to reach out. You can reach me at our website, preferredcfo.com. We'll also send out to all the participants that I'll email you this presentation so you have it. And then you'll have my email address, which is toma@preferredcfo.com. But I'll send you this presentation to everybody that signed up for this webinar. And don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions or anything I can help you with.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your time today. Thank you all for your attendance as well. Preferred CFO thanks you. And once again, any individual questions you may have, feel free to reach out to myself or to Tom, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks again. You guys have a great day and a great week.